I didn't believe Bruce Lee was as good as he is in his films. So he hit me and I fell onto the sofa with millions of people watching it.
I get asked about Bruce Lee all the time, and I can tell you that his sidekick was spectacular.
Before Bruce Lee, martial arts were mysterious, ritualistic, and tucked away in the shadows of culture. Then came a lightning bolt of a man who didn't just change the game, he ripped the doors off reality. Every story about Bruce Lee sounds like myth, too wild for belief, too cinematic to be true. Yet, the deeper you dig, the more you realize most of them actually happened. Let's separate fact from fiction and uncover the wildest Bruce Lee tales the world doubted until the cameras rolled. The one-inch punch that broke physics. It happened in front of a packed crowd in Long Beach, 1964. A man stood in front of Bruce Lee, arms folded, smug, ready to be unimpressed. Bruce didn't ask him to move back, didn't tell him to brace harder. He simply raised his hand, placed his knuckles against the man's chest, and paused. 1 inch, that's all the room he had. Then he struck. There was no wind-up, no shifting of weight that anyone could see. Just a blur of motion, and the man flew backward, crashing into a chair 6 feet away. The crowd fell silent. What they had just witnessed wasn't a parlor trick. It was raw kinetic energy being transferred with the efficiency of a sniper's bullet. Joe Rogan later said on his podcast that 1-inch punch sent a guy flying like he got hit with a shotgun. It wasn't an exaggeration. Years later, Stanford researchers analyzed footage and found something even more astonishing. Bruce wasn't just using his arm. His entire body operated as a single unit. Force started from the ground through his legs, twisted through his hips, exploded through his shoulder, and out his fist. In that single inch of movement, Bruce generated over 1,500 newtons of force, more than enough to break ribs. Skeptics tried to replicate it. Martial artists around the world attempted to mimic his technique. Some got close. None succeeded, because it wasn't just about mechanics. It was about control, timing, and years of conditioning so intense that Bruce's very body became a finely tuned weapon. It was the moment that turned a myth into a man and a man into a legend. This wasn't performance. This was proof. The 1-inch punch wasn't just a martial arts feat. It was a statement. That power didn't need size, that strength didn't need distance, and that what looked impossible was sometimes just misunderstood. Without this moment on film, many would still believe it was an exaggerated story, a tall tale passed between dojo mats. But it was captured, and it was real. Bruce stood calmly after the impact, not celebrating, not boasting. He simply bowed, because for him, that kind of power wasn't for show, it was for purpose. The crowd, once rowdy, was now reverent. They didn't clap right away. They were trying to make sense of what they saw. It looked like a magic trick, but magic doesn't bruise ribs. Magic doesn't send trained fighters flying. Only Bruce Lee did that. If the 1-inch punch felt like science fiction brought to life, then what came next shattered even more assumptions about what the human body could endure. Because if you think Bruce Lee's strength ended with punches, wait until you hear how he trained for them. Two-finger push-ups. Imagine a man drops to the floor, calmly places just 2 fingers of each hand on the ground, and starts doing push-ups. Not 1, not 10, but hundreds, without shaking, without breaking a sweat, while discussing philosophy. That man was Bruce Lee. 2-finger push-ups weren't just a party trick. They were an obsession. Each finger carried over 40 pounds of live, moving weight. There was no margin for error. A millimeter off in balance, and he could shatter his own fingers. But Bruce didn't just perform them. He built his body around them. His fingertips became iron, and his control over his muscles bordered on unnatural. Training partner Bob Wall once said he could talk to you while doing them, like it was nothing. That's because for Bruce, these weren't exercises, they were lessons. Each repetition trained precision, endurance, and the kind of internal focus most people never touch in a lifetime. His hands weren't just strong, they were surgical instruments, capable of locating pressure points or snapping boards with pinpoint accuracy. This wasn't documented through blurry stories. It was filmed, verified. You can still watch footage of Bruce dropping into two-finger push-ups like it's the most normal thing in the world. And this wasn't even his main workout. It was warm-up, the appetizer. The real training came after. Doctors have tried to explain how it was even possible. Bruce's bone density was through the roof. His tendons had thickened from repeated stress. His pain tolerance, refined by years of slamming his limbs into hard surfaces, was off the charts. But none of that explains the sheer elegance with which he did it. His body didn't just resist gravity, it cooperated with it, redirected it, used it as a partner instead of a force to fight. Most people think strength is measured by how much you lift, but Bruce Lee proved it's also about how precisely you can control that power. His fingers weren't just trained, they were forged. Years of pressing them into sand, then gravel, then steel pellets hardened them like stone. Yet, he never lost finesse. He could still tap a student's shoulder without hurting them, or accidentally dislocate it if he wasn't careful, which actually happened. But we'll get to that later. Bruce wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was testing the limits of human potential, and somehow he kept finding out that he didn't have any. And just when you thought the physical feats couldn't possibly get more absurd, what do you do with a man who is literally too fast for cameras to capture? Cameras literally couldn't keep up with Bruce Lee. What do you do when a man is so fast, your cameras think he's standing still? In 1966, on the set of The Green Hornet, a problem emerged. Director William Dozier and the crew were shooting fight scenes, but something kept going wrong with the footage. Bruce Lee would throw a punch. The stuntman would go flying. But when they watched the film back, it looked like Bruce hadn't moved at all. The cameras simply didn't catch the motion. At first, the crew thought it was a technical failure. They tested every piece of equipment. Everything checked out. Then they realized the truth. Bruce Lee's punches were moving faster than the cameras could record. Film rolled at 24 frames per second, but Bruce's fist completed its motion in less than 1 frame. In real time, his movements were invisible. This wasn't a myth. It happened in front of a full Hollywood crew. Fight choreographer Bob Wall measured one of Bruce's punches at 0.05 of a second from start to impact. That's faster than the average human reaction time, which means most people couldn't even flinch before the hit landed. So the producers had to do the unthinkable. They begged Bruce to slow down, to make his punches more visible for television. Imagine telling the greatest martial artist alive to move slower because the technology of the time literally couldn't handle him. Bruce wasn't thrilled, but he understood. He had to adjust, not for the sake of the fight, but for the sake of the audience. So when you watch The Green Hornet today and see Kato moving like a blur, know this: that was Bruce holding back. And yet, even while restraining himself, he was rewriting the rules of how action could be portrayed on screen. His movements were clean, economical, and absolutely explosive. But if you look closely, you'll notice something strange. He never wasted energy. There was no flashy showboating. Every strike, every dodge, every angle was done for maximum effect with minimum motion. He wasn't just fast. He was efficient to the point of invisibility. Later footage from Enter the Dragon and other films was shot using custom techniques just to keep up with his speed. Directors began using multiple cameras, higher frame rates, and slow-motion shots to make sure audiences could understand what was happening. Not because they were trying to dramatize the action, but because, otherwise, it would literally be too fast to see. Modern UFC fighters still study his tapes frame by frame. They analyze his footwork, his economy of movement, his timing. Decades later, he's still teaching new generations of fighters how to move smarter, not harder. But Bruce didn't stop at camera-breaking speed. Because after pushing the limits of what film could capture, he decided to push something else: bones. And that's where the next story begins. The strike that fractured a skull in 11 seconds. If breaking the speed of film was one level, What Bruce did next proved that his power wasn't just fast, it was lethal. And in 1960, that truth hit like a lightning bolt in a quiet YMCA handball court in Seattle. This wasn't on camera. There was no crowd, just witnesses sworn to secrecy and a silence that would be broken by the wet crack of bone under pressure. The opponent was Yoichi Nakachi, a respected Japanese black belt with years of training and serious credentials. He had heard rumors of a young Chinese kung fu instructor, just a teenager, teaching Americans. In those days, martial arts was tribal, and Nakachi didn't take kindly to what he saw as an upstart breaking tradition. He wanted to humble Bruce, make an example. What he got instead was an 11-second masterclass in controlled destruction. The moment the match began, Nakachi charged. Bruce slipped the first punch, ducked the second, and countered with a kick that shattered Nakachi's nose. Witnesses later said blood sprayed across the court. Then Bruce stepped forward, his footwork perfect, and delivered a fist straight into Nakachi's skull. The sound was sickening. One observer described it as like a coconut being cracked open on a rock. Nakachi dropped instantly, unconscious. A fractured skull, broken nose, severe concussion. The fight was over before it ever really began. There are no photos, no film, just a handful of people who saw what happened, and one small, haunting entry in Bruce Lee's personal journal. He wrote about that night not with pride, but with pain, because Bruce hadn't just won a fight, he had almost killed a man. That moment haunted him. It changed him. Linda Lee later said, "That was the day Bruce realized he was dangerous in a way he didn't yet fully understand, and that understanding reshaped everything." From that point forward, Bruce dedicated his training not just to power, but to control. He started asking hard questions about traditional forms, about why so many martial arts were based on rituals, not reality, about why the most important thing wasn't victory, but restraint. He didn't want to be a weapon. He wanted to be a master of one. That's when he began experimenting, studying boxing, fencing, wrestling, testing every movement, every stance, every tactic against real opponents. Nakachi's defeat wasn't just a win. It was the spark that led Bruce to create his own fighting philosophy. Not Wing Chun, not Kung Fu, not karate, but something faster, sharper, more personal. Something that didn't rely on tradition, but on truth. Later, when Bruce created Jeet Kune Do, the style that would redefine martial arts for decades, he wasn't just trying to be better. He was trying to make sure what happened in that YMCA would never happen again, unless it absolutely had to. But the power never left him. During filming, training, and even casual interactions, Bruce's body remembered what it could do. Like the time he gave a friendly slap on the shoulder that ended with someone's arm completely dislocated. Or the now infamous quote from Bob Wall, who said, "When Bruce hit you, it didn't feel like a punch. It felt like getting hit by a truck." Because what Bruce realized in that 11-second fight was that strength meant nothing if you couldn't control it. He didn't want to be feared for his fists. He wanted to be respected for how he chose not to use them. But when he did, the results were undeniable. Whether it was a knockout in a closed-door duel, a punch faster than light, or a sidekick that could move a man like a wrecking ball, Bruce's impact was always precise, calculated, and unforgettable. And what he did next would blow even Hollywood's best stuntmen away, literally. The Hollywood Warrior. When Bruce broke the industry. By the time Bruce Lee landed in Hollywood, the entire system was stacked against him. Casting directors looked for stereotypes, for sidekicks who bowed deeply and said little. Martial arts? That was novelty entertainment at best. Action stars were still bar brawlers with clenched fists and cowboy hats, not wiry philosophers with lightning reflexes and ancient wisdom. But Bruce didn't show up to fit in. He came to shatter every mold they had built. Joe Rogan once said, Bruce wasn't just ahead of his time, he was the future. And you could feel that from the moment he stepped on set. Producers hired him to play Kato in The Green Hornet, thinking they were getting a quirky chauffeur who knew a few kicks. What they got instead was a man so fast, the cameras literally couldn't capture him. They had to ask him to slow down so the audience could see the fight scenes. Behind the scenes, something deeper was happening. Bruce wasn't just showcasing kung fu, he was turning martial arts into cinema. He choreographed every move with surgical precision. Fight scenes became stories, with arcs, rhythm, and emotional peaks. Actors around him looked clumsy by comparison. Even seasoned professionals had trouble keeping up. But Bruce didn't care about fame in the traditional sense. What he cared about was power. Not in the political sense, but the power to move, to express, to create something so real and so raw that it stopped you in your tracks. That's why his greatest fight wasn't in front of the camera. It was behind closed doors. When Bruce pitched The Warrior, a show about a Chinese martial artist roaming the Wild West, he believed it would finally break the cycle of Asian stereotypes. But the network rejected it. They said audiences weren't ready. And then, a few years later, they gave that exact concept to David Carradine, a white actor playing a half-Chinese monk in Kung Fu. Bruce was devastated. He wrote in his journal, "They stole my idea, but they can't steal me." It was a turning point. He left Hollywood and returned to Hong Kong. And what happened next rewrote cinematic history. In Asia, Bruce became a phenomenon. He made The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, and Way of the Dragon, not as a performer, but as a creator. He directed, choreographed, wrote, and starred. These weren't just action films. They were political statements, cultural revolutions, and masterclasses in human potential. Then came Enter the Dragon, a co-production between Hollywood and Hong Kong that finally gave Bruce full creative control. Every punch, every camera angle, every word was his. The film was released in 1973 and became an instant global sensation. For the first time, a Chinese man was the undeniable star of a Western action movie. No accent jokes, no comedic sidekick role, just strength, wisdom, and fire. The success wasn't just box office numbers, it was personal redemption. The boy who couldn't get an audition without being told to act more Chinese had now forced the world to see him not as a gimmick, but as a force. But just weeks before the film's premiere, Bruce died. The world mourned, but the legend had already taken root. Joe Rogan captured it best. The dude forced Hollywood to respect martial arts and gave birth to every modern action star. There is no Jackie Chan, Jet Li, or even Keanu in The Matrix without Bruce Lee, according to one of his podcasts. But here's the thing, even in death, Bruce's influence didn't fade. In fact, it only grew stronger, because once you've seen him move, once you've felt that impossible blend of grace and ferocity, you start to wonder, how much more was he holding back? And that's where things get strange. Because some people believe Bruce's training went beyond what even his closest students ever saw. What if he had tapped into something deeper? Something that didn't just change film, but could change our understanding of what the human body is capable of? Let's dive into the next story. And this one, it just might be the most unbelievable of all. The Secret Room, Bruce Lee's hidden training vault. After Bruce Lee passed, fans clung to what little he left behind. Movie posters, grainy interviews, handwritten notes. But there was one space that remained locked to the world for decades. A room tucked inside his Kowloon Tong home in Hong Kong. No one really knew what was in there, just that Bruce had a key, and that even his closest students only saw glimpses. For years, Linda Lee, his widow, refused to let anyone inside. The room was sealed, private, sacred. But when she finally opened it for an archive project in the 1990s, the researchers didn't find memorabilia. They found obsession. The room was a time capsule of human potential. Dozens of notebooks, stacked and coded, each page detailing a specific exercise or movement. There were sketches of muscle fiber activation, anatomical diagrams, pressure point maps in 5 languages. One shelf held hand-carved training equipment Bruce had designed himself. Some looked like medieval torture devices, others like alien tech. And in the center of the room stood what looked like a standing coffin made of polished wood and metal. It wasn't a coffin. It was a full-body resistance chamber Bruce had built to simulate fighting multiple opponents in all directions. He trained inside it blindfolded. Jean Lebel, the judo champion who once sparred with Bruce, saw the device once and whispered, "That man was inventing things we still haven't caught up to." But what shook people the most was the audio. Bruce had recorded himself during solo training sessions, not just grunts or punches, but entire monologues. One tape included him talking through a breathing technique that no one could trace to any known martial art. His voice, steady and clear, said, "You must dissolve tension before the muscles move. The strike is over before the mind catches up." It wasn't just philosophy. It was instruction from someone who had trained himself to respond before thinking. That tape sent researchers into a frenzy. Neuroscientists later analyzed Bruce's known movements and concluded that his reaction time might have approached 0.45 seconds, nearly half the time of a professional athlete. It wasn't just fast. It was faster than conscious thought, which raises a question that still haunts those who knew him. What was Bruce training for? It wasn't for films. He'd already achieved stardom. It wasn't for tournaments. He didn't believe in competition. It wasn't ego, if anything. His journals were filled with humility and fear of failure. Some believe Bruce was preparing for something else entirely. Not a person, not a fight, but a level of expression so perfect, so seamless, that it would blur the line between art and combat completely. He wanted to become the movement, to exist not as a fighter, but as the physical embodiment of timing, of flow, of force. And the strangest thing, he might have come closer than anyone in history. One of his last notebooks had just 3 words written across an entire page: "No form, all form." Nobody knows exactly what he meant, but those who trained with him say that toward the end, Bruce's movements became something else entirely. Even sparring partners described it not as fighting, but as being inside a tornado that decided not to hit you. Dan Inosanto said once, "You'd throw a punch, and by the time it extended, Bruce was already past your guard." It wasn't just speed, it was premonition. Some martial artists believe Bruce developed a form of subconscious combat, where the body moves without the brain interfering. But here's the thing. If Bruce was building something more than just a body, if he was designing a martial artist that transcended style and thought, then that little locked room in Hong Kong wasn't a shrine. It was a lab. And Bruce Lee? He wasn't just the world's greatest martial artist. He was its first combat scientist. So what happened when that scientist's body gave out? Why did a man at the peak of his health, power, and global influence suddenly collapse and never wake up? That's where we go next. And fair warning, what you're about to hear, you may never forget. The slap that shattered a shoulder. There are moments in martial arts history that become folklore, not because of intention, but because of accidents that reveal terrifying truths. Bruce Lee's slap to Bob Baker in 1969 was never meant to be powerful, much less legendary. It began as a friendly pat on the shoulder during a demonstration, the kind of gesture that happens countless times in any gym or dojo. But that single motion, casual in nature, ended with Baker writhing on the ground, his shoulder fully dislocated and hanging at an unnatural angle. The room froze as the silence that followed the sharp, wet pop told everyone something had gone very wrong. Bruce, who had trained for years to control every ounce of his power, looked down in shock as he realized that even his most relaxed movements had crossed into something dangerous. Baker was no novice. He had absorbed blows from the toughest fighters in the scene, but nothing in his long career had prepared him for this. The injury was so severe that UCLA doctors treating him compared it to trauma sustained in car accidents. The X-rays showed the humerus driven 2 inches out of its socket, and the torn connective tissue told a story of brute force far beyond normal human output. Bruce stood by Baker the entire time, holding his hand in the ambulance, covering medical bills, and personally attending his physical therapy sessions for months. But beneath that loyalty was a deeper fear that his power was evolving past his ability to contain it. He had developed precision through years of iron palm training and fingertip drills, but this moment revealed the true consequences of that mastery. Even the slightest misjudgment could cause real damage. This wasn't just a warning to those around him, it was a warning to himself. Bruce was learning, in the most painful way possible, that he was walking a razor-thin line between mastery and destruction. The story spread quickly across martial arts circles, not as gossip, but as a legend. Even Bruce Lee's lightest touch, when unguarded, could break a body. It changed the way he approached sparring. His demonstrations grew more cautious. His strikes became more measured, not because he had slowed down, but because he had fully understood what he had become. A weapon that had to be used with absolute clarity and discipline. The slap became a symbol, not of recklessness, but of respect. It was a moment that demanded everyone watching to recognize just how far Bruce had taken the human body, and what could happen when that limit was crossed. But what happens when that power gets refined even further? When it transforms from unintentional destruction to precision so sharp that even bricks crumble beneath a single tap? The answer lies in a feat that challenged not just physics, but belief itself. Shattering bricks with 2 fingers. To those who only saw Bruce Lee on the big screen, it was easy to believe that many of his feats were enhanced by clever camera tricks or Hollywood special effects. But those who trained with him, who stood in the same room and watched the impossible unfold before their eyes, knew the truth ran much deeper. One such truth came crashing into view during a private training session in 1972 when actor James Coburn witnessed something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. There were no film crews, no stage lighting, no illusion, just Bruce, a brick, and 2 fingers that seemed to bend the laws of the universe. Coburn expected a flashy demonstration, something meant to impress a Hollywood visitor. But Bruce was never interested in empty spectacle. He laid a standard construction brick across 2 supports, examined it quietly, like a surgeon preparing for delicate work, then extended his index and middle finger above the brick's center. With no visible wind-up, no stance or flourish, he simply drove them straight down. The sound that followed was not loud, but sharp. The brick split cleanly in half. Not chipped, not cracked, split. Coburn was stunned. The pieces of the brick revealed no gimmick, no pre-scored lines, no hidden cuts, just raw, fractured stone. It was real. What Bruce accomplished in that moment was the result of years of excruciating training. He began each morning pressing his fingers into buckets of sand, then gravel, and eventually steel pellets. Hundreds of repetitions turned soft flesh into tools of destruction. The pain was constant. His fingers would swell, bleed, and blister, but he kept going, turning agony into adaptation. His bones grew denser, his tendons thickened, and his nerve endings dulled to the point where most people would have recoiled from the very contact he practiced daily. But this was not just about brute force. Bruce understood leverage, physics, and kinetic chains better than most engineers. His body was a single unit, moving in perfect sequence. That 2-finger strike began in his feet, coiled through his calves, exploded through his core, and exited cleanly through his fingertips. He didn't simply break the brick. He dismantled the idea that human hands had limits. Chuck Norris once tried to replicate the technique. He was one of the strongest, most technically skilled martial artists alive. On his first attempt, he nearly broke his own fingers. It wasn't about size or strength. It was about training so brutal, so precise, and so unrelenting that your body evolved into something more. Bruce had achieved that transformation. He had become the weapon. There was no ceremony after the brick broke. Bruce simply swept the shards aside and continued training as if nothing had happened. But for those who saw it, who truly understood what had just taken place, the memory burned deep. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't for show. It was mastery so profound that it made even the impossible look effortless. And yet, for Bruce Lee, this was not the pinnacle. The same hands that broke bricks with surgical precision could also deceive Hollywood's best with tricks of speed and sleight that made even professional magicians question their own eyes. How could someone who shattered stone with raw force also snatch a coin from your hand before your brain even registered the movement? That paradox of strength and subtlety would become one of Bruce's most confounding legacies, and it all started with a simple coin. Bruce Lee didn't just break boards or defy physics, he shattered the limits of human potential. Behind every unbelievable story was a man who trained with obsession, lived with purpose, and moved with a precision the world had never seen. These weren't myths, they were glimpses into what happens when mastery meets discipline. And now, after watching them, maybe you believe too. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us which Bruce Lee moment shocked you the most.